Acceptance is not love. You love a person, including yourself, because they have lovable traits. But you accept everybody, including yourself, just because we're alive and we're human. This is a quote from psychologist Albert Ellis, and this episode is all about acceptance of yourself, of others, and of what is existing around you. Welcome to The Modern Creative Woman, exploring the art and science of creativity. I'm your hostess and creativity expert, Dr. Amy Backos. Let's get started. Hello, my beautiful friends. I want to give a special shout out to the women and men who have given a 5-star rating to the podcast. I really appreciate you so much. This is how we get the word out to other women that there really are easy and fun ways to create our lives the way we want. And it's all about the art and science of creativity. I am having such an amazing month with the women inside the Modern Creative Woman membership. We are focusing on fresh starts and how to really stay the course, especially when we feel like giving up. There's a really important first step to change. And it is always acceptance. It's about accepting our current selves and our current situation. Doesn't mean we like what's happening in our current situation. But acceptance is really just the opposite of denial. It's not about approval or wanting something. It's just getting out of denial. And when we deny ourselves, or we deny the situation we're in, we put our head in the sand, so to speak, we increase our suffering. Now, of course, pain is a part of life, but suffering is something we just establish for ourselves by using avoidance and denial and withholding self-love. I love to look up definitions in Merriam-Webster. I used to have a rabbit named Merriam-Webster. So I looked up acceptance in this general term. And it's the quality or state of being accepted or acceptable. And it's approving of ourselves. It's the act of accepting something, the fact of being accepted. I want to talk about how self-acceptance really impacts our relationship to ourselves. It's about being satisfied with our current self. And it's a decision we make. We don't have to wait until we've accomplished all our dreams or finished all the goals or ticked off everything on our to-do list. Acceptance happens completely separate from anything outside of ourselves. It's an agreement that we set up with ourselves about just appreciating, supporting ourselves, validating our existence, despite any negative past behavior or whatever deficiencies we're imagining we have. And people often have trouble accepting themselves because they're racked with guilt. They have past trauma that they think about in a way that's unhelpful. Or they might perceive that they have like a lack of motivation, so they can't possibly be acceptable. And a lot of the women I work with have an initial misconception that if you're happy with yourself, when you approve of yourself, it means that you wouldn't change anything else about who you are. And that's not true at all. Self-acceptance for yourself means no longer rejecting yourself. There is a lot of research that rejection is bad for our health. Long-term states of self-isolation or loneliness coupled with rejection can deteriorate our physical health. And these negative kinds of thoughts about ourselves make our sleep worse. They can compromise our immune system and even lessen our lifespan. Now, social acceptance is something that affects people of all ages. And that's essentially being welcoming around others, imagining that we welcome and appreciate differences, diversity in others, and oftentimes when we dislike, distrust, or hate others from whom we are different, it can really be a symptom of our own self-loathing, our own lack of acceptance. And developmentally, we understand that we crave acceptance, certainly in childhood from our caregivers, in adolescence from our peers, and in adulthoods, we crave it from ourselves and the people we love. Acceptance figures prominently in psychology. Accepting one's mental condition in that moment, or perhaps a diagnosis, is an essential part of healing. Acceptance also figures into the 12 steps of recovery from addiction. Acceptance is a part of the stages of grieving in Kubler-Ross's famous way of understanding the stages of grief. And of course, it's a central component of acceptance and commitment therapy, as the name suggests. I want to talk a little bit about mindset and how I describe it in the modern creative woman. When I'm talking about mindset, I'm talking about both acceptance and our relationship to our thoughts, which is essentially accepting what our thoughts are producing and not necessarily believing them. Acceptance is our ability to see things for what they are, and we're notoriously bad at that as human beings. Our brains learn to do what's called chunking information, and it means that we overgeneralize. If you've ever been around a small child and they first learn about animals and they learn, oh, this is a dog, and then they go out in the world and they see a cat and they call it a dog, they're kind of overgeneralizing what they've learned about four-legged animals. So then we teach them, no, that's not a dog, that's a cat. These are both animals. And they develop, two tiers of understanding. Oh, these are animals, this one's a dog, this one's a cat. And our brain overgeneralizes because of lack of information, and it's convenient. We spend less time and energy using our brain when we chunk things together, lump things together. And learning not to do this takes a lot of practice. When we start to link ideas together in our brains, we will often end up feeling worse, judging ourselves, judging others. And acceptance is a core concept in changing how we talk to ourselves, what we believe of ourselves. I want to address what acceptance is not. Acceptance does not mean that we like what we see or feel or think. Acceptance does not mean that we forgive someone who wronged us. It also does not mean that we approve of what is happening. We may find that we're in a bit of an uncomfortable situation, maybe with finances, at home, in a relationship. It doesn't mean we like it, but it's only when we accept and see truly what is happening around us that we can kind of put down that burden of denial and deal with it. But acceptance does not mean that we like it. Acceptance is really important in 3 ways. It can help us in creating satisfying relationships. Accepting that someone is saying something means that we can maybe not take it so personally or distort comments or beat ourselves up. Acceptance can help us stop being so defensive, stop attacking. Another way acceptance is extremely helpful is socially. We can be more rational citizens by giving ourselves the space to see the big picture in our neighborhood, in politics, in groups, and organizations that we belong to. And finally, acceptance helps us be kind human beings. When we eliminate our own self-judgments and self-criticism, then we can be deeply, truly kind and connect with others. I work with a lot of women who will put all their children and family needs ahead of theirs. They'll think highly of everyone except for themselves. And they think that's the right way to be, to put themselves last, when in fact the opposite is true. When we become a living example of someone who accepts and loves themselves, then people can relate to that as aspirational, as interesting, as exciting, and is really nourishing. It's incredibly gentle and kind when we put ourselves in the company of people who accept themselves. I want to talk about a variation on acceptance, and that's our relationship to our thoughts. This is another really important component of mindset in the modern creative woman. we talk about cognitive diffusion, and it's giving us perspective and ease on what's happening in our brain when we're able to step back, observe our thoughts for what they are, and not believe every thought that we think. I want to remind you the verbal centers of our brain, Broca's and Wernicke's area, are about the size of a peanut. And that verbal component of our body is unable to hold the whole picture. Diffusion from our thoughts means that we get in contact with our kind of observing self to see things for what they are. There's an old thought. Here's a better thought. But remember, thoughts are just neurons firing in our brain. They are not the truth. They are not a real thing. You might think about something happening in the world, but it doesn't make it happen when you think about it. However, we tend to overgeneralize in our thinking, and we'll have a negative thought about ourselves and we'll believe it as if it were a true fact in the world, and it's not. The moment we can shift our relationship to our thoughts from being fused with them, believing the verbal experience as truth, and shift into believing the verbal experience as just a part of our bodily sensations, our heart beats, our brain thinks. The moment we make that shift, we are in a much better position to accept who we are, because we're accepting that thoughts are just thoughts. One neuron firing across a synapse to another neuron. I want to give you a couple examples of when we are fused in our brain with the thoughts that we're thinking. Maybe you've had this experience where you're going on about your day and you suddenly remember something that upset you and you start thinking about it, and now you're in a bad mood and you're maybe worked up over an argument that you had or a situation in the world. Nothing's happened outside of you, but your mood has changed completely just because of this one thought. Here's another example. I was talking with one of the women in the membership about her writing. She's working on a book. And we were sharing the really ridiculous thoughts that come into our brains when we're writing. I say, oh, this is garbage. Oh, Amy, what have you done? You just ripped apart this whole chapter. Now it doesn't make any sense. This is terrible. It's the kind of thoughts I have. But I know they're not true. It's just my brain rattling on in a critical way about what I'm writing. And it made me feel better that she has those same kind of negative thoughts. And plenty of writers have written about that same observation of themselves. Stepping back and noticing that their brain is telling them something awful about their writing. So when we're fused, we believe it. We say, oh, this is terrible. I'm going to quit writing. Scrap it. I don't want to write another book. But that's not the truth. It's just a thought in our head. And we persist going towards our values and our goals. But when we believe it and we quit, it means we're fused with those thoughts and we're allowing our thoughts to dictate what we do instead of allowing our values to lead us. Here's another example of when we're fused to our thoughts. If we're withholding empathy and we're passing judgment either to ourselves or to others, it means we're thinking negative thoughts and putting it on the outside. It's when we project our problems onto some other person or some group of people. Another example, anytime we are not looking at the big picture, we're only thinking of our thoughts, thinking of ourselves, instead of seeing the big picture, that there's so many other ways of knowing. Our intuition is a way of knowing. Art is a way of knowing. Talking to your coach, your therapist is another way of knowing. There's so many ways that we can unpack and experience the world through meditation, through singing, through all kinds of creative practice. But if we're only making our decisions based on what our brain is doing, it's really limiting us. And finally, the example that I think comes up over and over for people before they come in to see a therapist or a coach is that they have the same thoughts and feelings over and over and over again. They start something and then they quit. They feel like something's wrong with them, they're not good enough, and it's the same old story over and over again. And all they're doing is repeating an old story and letting that guide them, and they start to feel bad. So I want to kind of summarize for you what cognitive diffusion is. Remember, it's stepping back and seeing our thoughts for just what they are. It's really important because it gives your brain the opportunity to just see your thoughts for what they are. It helps you eliminate jumping to conclusions. Anybody ever do that? It helps you make space for creative thinking, and that is really important. If we allow thoughts to judge our creative process, we might not continue our practice. A diffused way of thinking really lets us find solutions to even our most persistent of problems. For example, have you ever done a brainstorm, a true brainstorm, where you just write everything down, or you make a recording of yourself and you give everything that you can think of about solving a problem, and you withhold judgment completely until you're done making a list? If you've never done this, pause right now and go make a brainstorm list. You can brainstorm all the things that you'd like to do with your life. You can brainstorm all the fun celebrations you want to have next year. Anything can lend itself to a brainstorm. But if you brainstorm solutions to a potential problem without any kind of judgment, you don't stop and say, well, that would never work, and this one's too ridiculous, and I can't do that one, and this one would cause too much trouble. You just keep writing and writing until you exhaust your brain from ideas. Then you look down and you realize you've generated a creative list of possible ideas. And every time I've done this, there's always one on there that leaps out as something that I can do, that I can take action. You can also ask yourself, when you're feeling fused, what else might be true right now? Is there anything else besides I'm not good enough? Or is there anything else besides they're judging me? This is one of the most powerful questions that you can ask yourself to help you move towards acceptance. What else might be true here? Oftentimes, I'll get to this point in either doing therapy or in the Modern Creative Woman, and someone will say, well, what can I believe? What can I trust out of my head? There's so many ways that you can use your brain to do stuff besides beat yourself up, judge yourself, increase your suffering through non-acceptance. So I have a list of what we can believe. And it matters because it can be really disorienting when you start to take a step away from believing all your negative thoughts. They can be very comforting, familiar thoughts, even if you don't like them. You might even feel like you're a boat adrift with no land in sight. You might feel extra critical of yourself for not getting it right. And, we always have a relapse back to old thoughts. You might even just really have the urge to go back to old thoughts. But what you can believe in is the truth that's happening for you in the moment. And when I think about my truth that's happening right now, it includes our values, like what's most important to us. We can really think about those and allow our values to guide us instead of our thoughts. You can also rely on thoughts that you choose instead of those old automatic ones. And one way to think of it is when we have an initial uncomfortable thought, those are the ones that we are often socialized to think. It's that second thought that you choose that is more of your truth in the moment. You can also rely on your current big picture perspective. You can look around and see what else is happening besides your thoughts. You can also rely on your intuition. And here's one that you're going to really love. You can rely on your story as you decide to tell it. You can take a problem-saturated story and really re-author it so that you are telling the story from a perspective that you feel good about. I do want to remind you, there is no need to try and stop or eliminate your thoughts. You've been thinking those thoughts for almost as old as you are. These thoughts are not going to disappear overnight or in a month, and maybe not in 3 months. But you don't have to stop them. It's just about accepting that those thoughts pop up without judgment. Oh, there's that old story again. Oh, here comes my mean girl. I'm feeling anxious going into this new social situation, and my brain is judging me. Isn't that interesting? Just a reminder, diffusion is when you can be in your wise mind, seeing your thoughts for what they are, just a biological process. So you can think about answering this question for yourself. What's your most interesting, exciting, scary, value-based belief? What's most important to you? Those are your truths. And when we can allow those truths to guide us rather than our old thoughts, we can make progress in the direction of our dreams. And we can move towards creating our life as we want it to be. So it's an invitation for you to write, to paint or draw your value-based feelings. What's it feel like when you're really engaged in what's most important to you? And it includes that feeling of acceptance of yourself and others. And it allows you to have this step back, look at the big picture, get in contact with the present moment, and really diffuse from your thoughts. So if you're thinking about this kind of work and creativity, and you want to live your life around the art and science of creativity, I personally invite you to join the Modern Creative Woman membership. Honestly, it's the most unique creativity program I've ever heard of. It's so good. You learn a complete system to focus on 3 primary ways of creating: through your presence, your mindset, and your unique purpose. And today's podcast was all about mindset. And you just got a little taste of how we use mindset to focus our minds to be more creative. And if you find value in the Modern Creative Woman podcast and you would like to have a value exchange, you can find the link in our show notes and sponsor the community for as little as $3 a month. And this really offsets the cost of producing the show. If you'd like to support in other creative ways, you can be an ambassador and share the podcast link with 3 of your friends. You can also be a community supporter by leaving a 5-star and a review. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. So now that you know, what will you create? Do come join me and the Modern Creative Woman on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at Dr. Amy Backos. Simply find the link in our show notes and you can sponsor our community. And you can also get a copy of the 5 values of the Modern Creative Woman. Hop on over to moderncreativewoman.com and join the email list to get creativity delivered right to your inbox. And you get a free copy of the aspirational principles that you need to live your modern creative life. Have a wonderful week, and I cannot wait to talk with you in the next episode about the art and science of creativity. I will see you next time.